Madam President, I rise today to address the bill that has been recently, and I emphasize the word recently, introduced into the House of Representatives. I believe it was introduced Monday. It's having not a hearing, but a markup today, and maybe on the House floor as soon as tomorrow or early next week. As the President said recently, healthcare is complicated. And to me, to introduce a bill that was not available to any members of Congress before Monday, mark it up in committee 2 days later, and attempt to pass it on the floor of the House, and then I understand it may come directly to the floor of the United States Senate without any committee consideration, it just seems to me is a disservice to the process and a disservice to the traditions and practices of this institution. This is complicated. It is difficult. The ramifications and implications of this bill, just as any other major change in our healthcare system, are incredibly important. This isn't about ideology, this is about people. This is about the impact on people, and I want to talk about the impact of this bill as we have thus far been able to assess it on the people of Maine. When I look at a piece of legislation down here, I start with Maine. How will it affect the people that live along our coasts or on the inland in the small towns, and particularly people who are above the age of 50? Maine happens to be the oldest state in the country, and therefore anything which negatively impacts seniors doubly negatively impacts the people of my state. And I feel that this bill is a disaster for seniors. And when I define seniors in this case as anybody over 50, because it does several things. One of the things it does, and there should be a great deal of discussion about this, under the Affordable Care Act, which recognizes the fact that seniors and people who are older tend to have more medical needs than those who are younger, it says it caps the differential at 3 times. In other words, a senior can only pay 3 times what a younger person pays, and even that is burdensome in many cases. This bill changes 3 to 5. It will be a very substantial increase in the payments and the cost of insurance and health care to senior citizens. Now, the Kaiser Family Foundation, which is, I find, the most nonpartisan and informative source of information on all of these issues, has created a handy tool on their website where you can put in information such as family income and age and determine what you would have paid under the Affordable Care Act and what you would pay under this new bill. What they found was, I wanted to look and see what will somebody in my state pay. If you're a 60-year-old in Aroostook County, Maine, with an income of $30,000, the subsidy, the support for the premium for individual insurance would fall by 70%. The support for your insurance policy under the Affordable Care Act would fall by 70%. Throughout our state, the average decrease would be 48%, almost half. So we're talking not about some theoretical, ideological, political thing here. We're talking about people's ability to afford health insurance. It's about as clear as it could be. And that's why it's frustrating to me that we're going to be asked to, we collectively, the Congress, is going to be asked to consider this bill with literally no hearings, no input from the public, no discussion of how all the pieces fit together or don't fit together. And yet we're going to be asked, I believe my understanding is, we're going to be asked to vote on this bill sometime on the floor of the United States Senate without any committee consideration in the next week or so. This is just too important to people's lives to give it such short shrift. It's just not right to make changes of this magnitude that are so vital to people's well-being and literally their health and their survival in some cases, that it's unthinkable to me that we would do this without a round of hearings and discussions and the regular order that we supposedly honor around here as to how major legislation is to come to the floor. I just got a letter just recently. Hi, Angus. I like it when my correspondents say hi, Angus, instead of Senator. Hi, Angus, he says. I've worked in the pulp and paper industry for close to 30 years. It was a good industry up here, supported middle-class families in northern Maine. But we've had layoffs and closures of our mills. After every closure, I had to obtain health insurance for my family on my own. Before Obamacare, this was a disaster. Before Obamacare, this was a disaster. I could only obtain catastrophic insurance from one of two providers. There was no way I could pay $1,500 a month for a decent plan. After Obamacare, I could obtain decent insurance at a decent price. While there may have been problems for some, it was a godsend for my family. Please help ensure we don't go back to the old days. We're self-employed by our small business and would not be able to pay more for less. That's what the bill that's in the House would do, pay more for less. By the way, how does the money work in this bill? Well, one of the things the bill does, is my understanding, and again, I'm only operating on what we've seen in the last 24 hours because of no hearings, but one of the things it does is eliminate a tax on people who make over $250,000 a year in order to cut coverage for people who aren't making that kind of money. It's a tax cut and shifting the cost to our citizens, particularly our seniors. The pattern is shift and shaft. Shift the cost and shaft the people who need the coverage. This is supposed to be a substitute. It's supposed to be coverage for everyone. And you've got to be careful, Madam President, when people talk about access, they're talking about, yeah, you can buy it, but if you can't afford it, that's not really access. And this bill dramatically decreases the support for health insurance premiums through the Affordable Care Act. The reality is, and I hear a lot of talk about how Obamacare is collapsing, it isn't. More people signed up this year than last year. Yes, it's true the rates went up, but that was because younger people weren't signing up in significant numbers. We need to deal with that issue because that makes the risk pool older and sicker and therefore more expensive. But I've been told by insurance officials that if something like this bill that's in the House passes and the subsidies disappear and the Affordable Care Act goes away, the private health insurance market for individuals, the so-called individual market, will essentially collapse. And the reality is that the uninsured population of this country has fallen virtually in half since the passage of the Affordable Care Act. 22 million people have coverage now that didn't before. And we can take it away. And the other piece that I don't like about this bill is it phases things out so that the impact won't be felt until after the next election or sometime in the future. Well, the future comes. And in this case, the future is going to be pretty desolate for people that have health insurance now and aren't going to have it 2, 4, or 6 years from now. It's just not right. I'm one who has been saying since I entered this body now 4+ years ago that there are problems with the Affordable Care Act. We should be working on those problems. We should be working on repairing it, not destroying it. We should not be talking about taking health care coverage away from people in this country. I'm sure that I and many others will be addressing more comprehensively the provisions of this bill as it becomes more clear, even though we're going to have to ferret those provisions out because we're not going to have the benefit of expert testimony and views from a variety of points of view of how this is actually going to work. But the reality is, Madam President, I don't think there's much question that this proposal will hammer Maine and my people, and I can't stand for that. I hope that the House will have a more vigorous process. They'll understand what the implications are and take a more judicious approach so that we're not tearing insurance out from under people. We're not going to make the cost be driven up. We're not giving a tax break to people that make over $250,000 a year and at the same time taking coverage away from people who make $30,000 a year. That's wrong. We should be repairing, not repealing. And I think this bill is not the right place to start. I stand for the people of Maine. I stand for the people who are going to be harmed by this, whether they are seniors or working people or self-employed people or people who have been able to start businesses because they could get, for the first time, insurance under the Affordable Care Act. I believe that's our obligation here, and we have an opportunity to work together, and I'm willing to work with anyone who wants to work on improving and dealing with some of the issues that have been raised by the Affordable Care Act. But let's stop talking about repealing. Let's talk about fixing, strengthening, and meeting our commitment to our fellow citizens in Maine and across our country. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.